Right now, though, Jonathan Williams is the political science professor at Kellogg Community College, and he's back. It's been a little while. Good morning, John.
Yeah, good morning, Tim.
How long have you been teaching in, those types of classes, political science in that arena?
So 1993, 94 were my first classes I taught. I actually taught at the Jackson prison. I had worked at the Senate for Senator Phil Hoffman and wanted to do something a little bit different, and liked political science. Had my degree in political science, and so there was a posting in the paper right back in the day, and so I actually got my first job teaching a very captive audience. The attendance was fantastic, and then from there, it's I've continuously taught political science, a little bit of social, race and ethnic relations, so a number of different classes.
Up around 25 years. Man.
Yep. Yeah.
And when you started, Ross Perot was the wild card in the 1992 election.
Yeah, I remember that. And actually, for a long time, and I still use that even today, about how that, an independent candidate has a really tough time, particularly for president, when you start looking at the Electoral College and how you really have to break in and win the state before you actually get the electoral votes.
Mm-hmm.
But they have a way of sloughing votes from the two major bases. So I think that's a good indication of what happens when an individual fits the bill of what would be a conservative, typical Republican gets into a race when you already have an established Republican. It splits the base, so it can happen.
Well, Perot, I guess you could say, was a populist, much like our current president. I said what a lot of people wanted to hear.
Yeah.
In a lot of the key areas, and a lot of that were with Perot was jobs going to Mexico.
Yep, that sucking sound. You remember that?
Giant sucking sound. Yeah. And of course, Mr. Perot just passed away at a ripe old age, and so we're reminiscent of his candidacy. But really, that was the last time that. And if he hadn't dropped out and then jumped back in, who knows what would have happened?
Yeah.
He could have been elected, or could have, I don't know what it could have done. But now we're talking about it again today because Justin Amash, our congressman here in our district, has left the Republican Party.
Yeah.
He's an independent now. I mean, he'll say he's a libertarian, but he hasn't really come out and said, yes, I'm a member of the Libertarian Party, I don't think.
Yeah. Excuse me. He's always had those libertarian leanings. And kind of come out. The Tea Party group of individuals, that movement, the Tea Party movement, was always kind of that. If you want to talk about right and left in terms of freedom and equality and limited government versus active government, he's always been kind of that far right and keeping it really close to the Constitution, and it was very appealing and has been very appealing, I think, for a number of individuals in the Republican Party. So if he breaks from the Republican Party and then runs as a libertarian very close to that. That party's base, he excuse me, may actually receive those votes of the libertarians.
He'll probably still get some support, but I think he's done getting massive Republican votes.
Yeah. I just seen a stat that something like 90% of the Republican base supports the president, and it's if you had some dissension in the base, then maybe there'd be an opportunity, but there isn't there.
The thing about Amash, there are really two things about Amash that strike me. One is that he seems to be kind of a rare principled politician. In other words, a lot of times he'll vote no on a bill and people will say, oh, he voted no on the bill that would help children.
Yeah.
And then he'll explain it. Well, the reason is because they tried to stick a pork bill in there that would do a bunch of terrible things and cost us billions of dollars. And I'm not going to do that. Yeah. And because it's not right.
Yeah.
And, and he was, so I think, but now all of a sudden, oh, he crossed the president. Doesn't matter if he's honest. His name is mud. People who are big supporters of the president just hate him.
Yeah, which is and it's unfortunate. I mean, you have a couple of individuals out there, Mitt Romney, obviously, and then Justin Amash. He doesn't always get support from Fred Upton, so another Michiganian. Which I understand the idea of holding the principle, and I've always appreciated Justin Amash's process when he'd vote, regardless of his vote, he'd actually explain it in detail. I always found that to be really interesting. I don't know how many individuals would read that for policy wonks, or individuals who would say, you know what, why did he go against the grain? To go in and look at his interpretation of the Constitution and then his thinking behind it.
He would explain it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, people will talk about, well, if you have a third party candidate, they're just going to steal votes from the conservative.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Do you think that would be true of Amash if he ran in the third party? And here's why I'm wondering this. It used to be that the left or the Democratic Party were the champions of civil liberties.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, and certainly Justin Amash is maybe the biggest champion of civil liberties in the U.S. Congress. In my opinion. And so you would think that Democrats would vote for him, but somebody told me the other day, and you know what, when they get in the voting booth, they're not voting for him.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that the idea that when individuals start to look at the impact of their vote, and they do, and it's hammered home. You don't think that, voters are sophisticated to recognize that when it's a two candidate, a third candidate gets in the race, that if they're not voting for the one that maybe is of the two major parties closest to them, then they're tossing a vote the other way. And I know individuals try to reject that, but usually they reject that because they don't like the two major candidates. But most voters are savvy enough to recognize that. So it's really hard to break through. Again, talking about Ross Perot, just really hard to break through. Even he had 19% of the popular vote, but not a single electoral vote. So, he gets nearly 1 in 5 voters, but not one electoral vote. So, but your question was about how does that impact the outcome of election? Well, in that case, the majority of those voters would have been Bush voters. And so what close states may have tipped, I don't know if we've ever gone back and taken a look at that, but could Michigan be one of those very close states that could tip in a situation where it's 16 electoral votes, now are in the other bucket?
And in the case of Amash's congressional district here, Grand Rapids and down to Battle Creek, because of Grand Rapids, it's a Republican stronghold, but if Amash runs as an independent, could he take enough votes from a Republican candidate to let the Democrat win that seat?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So we're talking about now, I was talking about his potential running for president, which he hasn't discounted, but you're right, as running as a third-party candidate for Congress, that's a distinct possibility as well, and probably even more likely because now you're not dealing with the Electoral College per se. But and I do, having some experience running for State Board of Education, had we not had generally speaking, libertarian candidates tend to be on the right, and those individuals who are likely to vote Libertarian or U.S. Tax Party tend to be a little bit more conservative, the small government, the pro-freedom side. So,
right.
So they're kind of natural constituencies to the Republican Party if there aren't candidates there. There are candidates there because they don't agree fully, obviously, with the Republican Party. So there are, principled platform reasons for the Libertarian and U.S. taxpayer parties. But having said that, in some of those races, if there weren't candidates there, you wonder if those constituencies would have voted Republican. So back to the idea of the State Board of Education race, if you were to take the candidates that ran for U.S. taxpayers and the Libertarian Party, and assume that many of those individuals would have voted Republican given the choice between the Republican or Democrat candidate, then the numbers would have been there. I would have been elected to the State Board of Education. Again, that's a lot of what ifs. But
we see it all the time, and a lot of people think that because we have two parties, Republican or Democrat, that we don't have a choice. We have a dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
You go in there, it's going to be this one or that one. It's not a choice. It's a dilemma. And a lot of people believe that we should have a choice, but we don't.
Yeah.
Our system doesn't support a third party.
It's funny, and because you're right, we have this conversation in class quite often because students are always, I don't agree with either party. And generally what happens is oftentimes it's a specific issue or a very, they see that the issues aren't as black and white as the parties make them to be. But what often happens is the parties themselves will begin to shift. So, and we're talking about kind of a hard shift to the left for the Democrats, but
Right.
there's also been, movement of what, for example, John F. Kennedy, as I've heard, and as my father would say, he'd be welcoming the Republican Party with open arms today.
Right.
I mean, and so the parties themselves shift. So the issues shift to kind of absorb the individuals who are upset with, and they're constantly doing that. They're not static themselves.
Yeah. We're talking with Jon Williams from KCC's Political Science Department. What else do you teach up there?
Well, I actually teach some service learning too. It's mostly political science, American government, but comparative politics, international relations, and then we have a service learning program at KCC it's really a good program, and I'm happy to be involved with that as well. It gets the students back into the community, and then through service and reflection, come back and recognize, and we tie it back together with policy. How do we create systemic change? You really do that through policy. So it's a good closing the loop, so to speak.
We're talking with Jon Williams, Kellogg Community College political science professor. And, John, one thing that I was going to say, there was two things about Justin Amash. One that I admired his integrity and being honest with the voters. And, the thing that I did not like about him and do not like about him, it wouldn't hurt him to get away from his principles for just a minute, kiss a few babies, patch a few potholes, and up his constituent services. I mean, if you call your congressman with a problem and all of a sudden it gets straightened out, you remember that sort of thing. If you're a local businessman struggling to make ends meet and all of a sudden you see the guys in the trenches fighting for your local economy, that goes a long way. And to see a champion of individual rights and liberties and the U.S. Constitution representing our district, I love that. But you know what? He could have done both, and he did not.
Yeah,
he has not.
Yeah. There's some truth. You and I were just talking off air to the degree that Justin Amash is that individual who, again, for a political science professor, someone who's really tied to what goes on in Washington. He's one of those individuals you just watch. What you're talking about, and you recall Spence Abraham, really kind of doomed Spence Abraham to his reelection. He said, I'm a workhorse, I'm not a show horse. I'm in Washington, I'm working for you. But you gotta also play that flip side of being approachable to individuals, of being that person that people see at the supermarket. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you don't catch that, then that whole idea, that whole experiment of sending citizens to Washington kind of gets washed over if you don't see yourself in those persons you're sending up there.
Well, and you as an instructor for 25 years in this, that it doesn't matter how bad an elected representative could be. If he's our guy, he gets reelected generally. Yeah. The incumbent can do just about anything. But he's our guy, old Jim. But I think Justin Amash is maybe not looked on as our congressman, but a congressman, and there's a big difference.
Yeah, and adopted, I think, again, by a lot of individuals who are Tea Party right, who again have a candidate in their district that maybe that makes sense in their district because their district may be very split, but then or also appreciate the individuals like a Justin Amash up there kind of fighting for them, even though they're not in his district per se. But yeah, you're right. When it comes to, 51%, that's it, or 50% plus one, that's it in terms of getting your guy elected or into office. And so you don't have to win everybody's heart, but if you can win the majority of those voters' hearts, that's enough. And that tends to keep going and keep going and keep going.
Your professional opinion, if he runs as an independent for his congressional seat again, does he have any chance?
Oh, my professional opinion. Look, I'm never going to say never. It's just a really tough. It's a really tough job to do. You lose a lot of the support. You lose a lot of that natural vote, the straight party ticket voter. You have individuals who are really upset with them, and the idea that somehow those individuals on the far right are so unhappy with the president to turn their attention to Justin Amash. But at the end of the day, Tim, it's going to come down who runs against him, right? So he's got decent name recognition for sure. There's some candidates that have already lined up to run against him, so there's going to be a primary for the Republican. party, and quite frankly, Justin Amash maybe even stayed as a Republican and ran. I mean, who knows? But you get enough individuals run against him, you split the base so many ways, then you have natural advantages of the incumbent. But for him to run as a libertarian, I mean, he'll get, or whatever, as an independent, he'll be able to be on the ticket. What does that do then to the Democrat and the Republican? And I think it depends on who the Republican is. I think there's a Myers running, as in, Myers Thrifty Acres, Myers running. So there's strong name recognition there.
There's going to be some strong candidates,
Yeah.
probably some more in there. They could have to spend a lot of money in the Republican primary.
Yeah.
Whereas Mosh will not have to.
Yeah.
But I think probably the winner's going to be whoever gets the DeVos money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's not going to matter when it comes around to the general election. That DeVos money's still going to be there for that Republican candidate.
Yeah, and I think that it's either, I mean, and again, you're asking for a professional opinion, and I see the last election for president was one that I would never have predicted.
Nobody,
yeah, and so I don't go out there and talk in confidence anymore. But we think that it's a conservative seat. We think a conservative, how we want to phrase that or define that, is going to hold that seat. But who knows this next election.
Nice to chat with you again, John, and we'll do it again soon. Jon Williams is the KCC political science professor. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tim.